Of updates on two highly contentious issues making news in our region. First up, fracking in New York State. After issuing a halt to the practice in 2008 by which energy companies pump all sorts of chemicals into groundwater to then push out natural gas for production, Governor Andrew Cuomo now says he'll allow the practice in limited sections of New York. Guidelines are going to come after Labor Day. Critics say the process pollutes the groundwater needed for people and farmers and can't be contained to an individual area, so a chemical leak at one site could impact surrounding communities, even big metro areas like New York City. Supporters say it's a way to boost the economy and provide much needed energy. Update number 2, the controversial voter ID law in Pennsylvania. Last week, a state judge okayed the law, which requires voters to present specific valid photo IDs in order to have their vote counted. The judge called it a minor change to current law and determined that voters wouldn't be harmed because they'd be allowed to cast provisional ballots that would be counted if they're needed. Supporters of voter ID say the laws are needed to protect the votes of everyone and stamp out voter fraud. Critics note that in-person voter fraud has never been documented in Pennsylvania and is so rare as to never impact the outcome of any election, and that it specifically targets blacks, Hispanics, and young voters, all generally Democratic-leaning groups. Voter ID likely to impact this November's elections. According to reports, about 758,000 people in Pennsylvania, or 9.2% of the entire group of voters, don't have the right IDs, likely to be stopped from voting on Election Day. In Philadelphia, one of the biggest Democratic strongholds, 18% of residents could be shut out of the voting booth. And last week's decision, now being appealed to the state Supreme Court, could go all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. The Justice Department is also considering a challenge in federal court. So, gentlemen, let's go back to fracking. Is it an environmental gamble here that needs more study or needs to be contained, or is it just we need the energy, we need the jobs, we need to get it done?
I trust the Democratic governor of New York.
Well,
Look, look, it's creepy. Yes, you know, is Erin Brockovich potentially cracking her knuckles somewhere in California? Is she going for her New York bar? Probably. Does it ring of yet another awful movie? Yes. However, you know, there is, with so much science these days, I don't think that Governor Cuomo would have come within 8 million miles of this thing if he wasn't presented with some good science.
Dominic, don't the politics make this particularly attractive to a guy like Andrew Cuomo? I mean, there's a lot of calls for it in a lot of places.
Well, I'm just glad, Andrew, that the governor Governor Cuomo in the state of New York is going forward in a limited way with this to begin with, because frankly it's very frightening when you think about it. I mean, think about this for a second, and we've had this discussion over and over. You know, we understand the argument about jobs. We get it. There are certain parts of the state, many areas around the country where people are hurting and need jobs. We understand the need for energy. But we also better understand the need of, we don't know what's in those chemicals going underground to push that energy up, and we don't know if it could seep and contaminate water, and then what happens if it happens to get into the water supply for a major metropolitan area.
New York City
isn't that what was probably covered in the governor's office for the last several years?
Yes, but wait a minute. You know, you have a problem. This is a very complex issue, as all these environmental issues are, because I always love when Republicans go, first thing we got to do is get rid of the EPA. Yeah, so we can go back to having rivers catch on fire in Ohio. You know, nobody seems to remember that. But on the other hand, we have a higher carbon footprint now than we ever had because we're burning more coal because we can't use natural gas, which we have an overabundance of in our country, and everybody wants and needs power. I mean, the biggest spokespeople for wanting to get rid of like every kind of power are the Hollywood elite, who all have private jets, which I find very amusing. Yeah. But I've done a lot of due diligence about this, and it's just, there is no easy answer. But again, I don't think Andrew Cuomo is going to do something that's going to be life-threatening to people just at the wave of a hand.
And certainly, you mentioned politics. Certainly, Mr. Cuomo is going to move very slowly, considering that he's a leading presidential candidate in 2016.
Took the words right out of my mouth. This is a guy who is on everybody's tip of everybody's tongue in terms of next 2016. So.
Scariest part for me is, even for a guy like Andrew Cuomo, the impact of this, if there's a negative impact environmentally, we're not going to find out about it until decades after he's already out of office. So really, you know, you say he wouldn't make a bad decision. I'm not so sure. Want to get in now to the voter ID law and the ruling in Pennsylvania. I was surprised by the ruling, although Republican-appointed judge, so I wasn't that surprised by it. Rob, let's start with you. What's your take on this? Do you think there really is a voter fraud problem?
No, and the only time anybody really took advantage of this was when somebody named John F. Kennedy was elected, and many people in Chicago and Boston voted 3 or 4 times and were just round-tripped in a lot of buses, and we're Democrats. But I went online and I looked to see who really complained about this vociferously, and only one person has, and that's Al Sharpton. So that kind of says it all for me. I don't think it's that big an issue.
About the voter ID laws.
Yes. He's complaining about the judge's decision and that there's an issue here, and everybody seems to think it's a non-issue.
I'm not so sure about that, but you're talking about Democratic-leaning voters, particularly in minorities and young people. I mean, why not put it in place for 2014 or 2016? Why the rush for November?
You already know the answer why. You already know the answer why.
But I'm fishing for it.
Okay, here's the visual. 2008.
Yeah.
Lines going back for miles, if you will, for people to vote for President Obama.
Right.
If I were of the opposite party, that would scare the hell out of me as well. If I were of the opposite party.
No, what scared us was the Black Panther with the club.
Okay, well, that clown.
That guy.
But anyway, so if you're of the opposite party, you've got to figure out a way. Hey, we can't have these young people of every type of races turning out to vote for this guy. We can't compete with that.
You know, Andrew.
And so the fix is in. It is an issue. The fix is in. And the city of Philadelphia, 18% of the people possibly will not be able to vote. No offense. What type of nonsense is that? This is America.
TJ, why is Dominic wrong?
Just because he is. No.
You know, I grew up with an old world Tammany Hall kind of politics where my parents.
Tammany Hall. Funny you mentioned
both
that.
of my parents. It was more
Rob
efficient.
was born in
it was more
1872.
efficient. My parents worked for the Democratic Party. They used to ride around in buses at election time and go, "We'll pick you up," and through a loudspeaker and take you to the land when you will be voting Democrat. I mean,
but that's not voter fraud. That's get out the vote.
But it was manipulating the people, and it was doing it in minority neighborhoods. It was, come on, everybody, come in and make sure you vote Democrat. And some people really didn't know the difference. Look, you're skirting a fine line there, but they're playing politics.
It's really not the same
Andrew,
thing.
You know, to address what you said about, why not for 2016? If not now, when we had the same situation then. This has been in the works for a little while now, and we'd have the same. If not now, when?
You don't put new rules right before the World Series. You do it at the beginning of the season.
But this thing has been in the pipeline for quite a while. And again, look, not to try to sound too trite here, but you have to show ID for just about everything now.
Fine, but why is it only Republican?
Yeah,
why is it only Republican officials that are so concerned with this issue?
Why is it that it's only Democrats who don't seem to want to even talk about the notion of voter fraud, even though there's no. Listen, it's very good voter fraud that they haven't been caught.
Here's a similarity. Obama has suddenly, after 4 years of doing nothing, become a proponent of gay marriage right around election time. It's a similar. It's a similar phenomenon.
I respectfully, one is a campaign issue or a policy.
Trying to create a little bit
the other one is a basic fundamental right that everybody has.